Welcome to SOCY 3300 Advanced Social Problems. This is the first of what I call videocasts or video podcast lectures. First things first, these videocasts should not take the place of reading the actual chapters. These are just introductions. So I'm Rob Cadle. I teach in the sociology department. Please feel free to call me Rob, or if you prefer, you can call me Dr. Cadle or Professor Cadle. Please just don't call me Mr. Cadle, because that's my dad. In this videocast, we're going to cover Macionis chapters 1 and 10, an introduction to social problems, and then also some information about the economy. The first concept I want to start off with, because we'll discuss this time and time again this term, is sensationalism sells. A lot of what we'll discuss are social problems that may seem worse than they are, or that don't seem like problems at all. A lot of this has to do with media coverage. So those are those things that are sensational or provocative are the things that get media coverage. So remember, sensationalism sells. That's my point here. Okay, let's kick off this videocast with an important definition: an institution. In sociology, an institution is not a brick and mortar building like you think of a school as an institution or a prison where people are institutionalized. In sociology, an institution is a well-established and organized pattern of group behavior accepted as a fundamental part of society. For example, religion, political structure, including government, economy, family, education, both within schools and outside. Next, what is sociology? Well, socio refers to the social world, and logos means the study of something. So sociology is the study of the social world. More specifically, sociology is the scientific study of groups. So whereas psychology studies individuals, sociology studies groups. We study collective actions and meanings within among groups, those that the group defines or that are outside of group definitions. So where did it all start? Auguste Comte is most often considered the founder of sociology. He believed there were natural laws of human behavior which the social chaos from the Industrial Revolution were out of line with. He sought to realign humanity with these laws, and he used the scientific method to do so. There are also some main sociological founders, including Emile Durkheim. Now, he made the distinction between primitive and modern societies, that modern societies are characterized by a division of labor. This is what holds modern societies together. The sacred and religious and collective conscience of held primitive societies together. Norms, social order, were derived from that collective consciousness. Durkheim researched what happens when norms are violated, deviance, and when individuals feel that norms don't apply to them anymore, like suicide and anomie, big topics for Emile Durkheim. Another founder of modern sociology is Karl Marx. To Marx, all society rests on the economy. Legal, political, cultural superstructures are built upon the economic structure of society. Marx discussed the economic history of the world as a progression of economic exploitation of the have-nots by the haves. Primitive communism, pre-ancient empire periods, came first, then slavery, Egypt, Rome, then feudalism, capitalism, socialism. Socialism had education as a part of it, and then eventually communism, which was kind of a utopia. So all social relationships are based on conflict between groups, usually those with power and those without. These two groups are the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, respectively. Now, some people ask, why are Marx's theories still popular if the Soviet Union fell? Well, first, the Soviet Union was never really communist. They were Marxist socialist. They still had a state, a government, still a currency, and so on. And further, although the progression to communism may not be veritable, conflict relationships are now most prevalent in sociological analysis. Many social problems we'll study are based on conflict between men and women, amongst ethnic groups, and yes, social classes. Lastly, we have, as a founder of modern sociology, Max Weber. He emphasized understanding from your subject's perspectives and experiences, what is known as Verstehen. Weber built on Marx's theories but stressed that conflict arises not just in the economic sphere and then trickles down to other institutions, but arises in every facet of society, e.g., religion, the family, politics, etc. One of Weber's biggest contribution was the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism. Weber explained the rise of the spirit of capitalism from the ethics of the Protestant Christians. For example, Ben Franklin, a penny saved is a penny earned. And lastly, Weber was very adamant about maintaining objective rationality in one's research. Now, based on those guys, there are three major theories of sociology that we'll use in this course, three different lenses, so to speak, through which we'll view society. The first is structural functionalism from Durkheim, that society's institutions, made up of individuals, define appropriate behaviors for its members and thus define order. Social problems arise because of rapid social change, for example, technology, transportation, communication, to which institutions can't keep up. The second is conflict theory from Marx and Weber, that inequality, economic, political, etc., generates social conflict among groups. This structure favors a select few who then exploit the rest. Thus, social problems arise because the powerful don't often have the powerless group's interests in mind. And finally, symbolic interactionism, the notion that the social world is a product of the interactions among social actors. It's a term coined by Herbert Blumer. It's important in looking at the connections between people and large social institutions. How do institutions arise? How do they think? A concept that comes from sociologist Mary Douglas, how institutions think. Well, social institutions think by interactions amongst the actors inside the institutions. So the way that individuals think makes up those social institutions based upon how they think, and those all kind of come together. Okay, so what is a social problem? Well, a social problem is a condition which is recognized to systematically disadvantage or harm a specific segment or a significant number of the society's population. In other words, a social problem is a problem that affects a lot of people, not just a few. Furthermore, it's a problem that is recognized as affecting lots of people. For example, spousal abuse was not considered a social problem until the media brought it to our attention a couple of decades ago. It was first considered the problem of a few deviants, or considered a private family matter. Now it's considered a social issue. Between 2 and 6 million women are abused each year by their partners or spouses. Okay, that's chapter 1. Moving on to Macionis chapter 10. What is an economy? It is a system for the management and development of a society's scarce human and material resources. Scarce is the key word there. If there were enough of everything to go around, we wouldn't need an economy to manage it. But there isn't enough oil. There aren't enough million-dollar houses. We don't have enough fresh water. So our economic system manages these thousands of resources, these and other resources like them. What are some characteristics of the U.S. economy? First, let's talk oligopolies, also known as shared monopolies. These exist when you have control of an industry by a small number of companies. Increasingly, as in during the last half century, they are a defining characteristic of U.S. industries. Now, over 60% of all goods produced in the U.S. are produced in oligopolistic industries. For your information, a couple of important terms. Industry versus firm. We have an auto industry of which GM, General Motors, is a participating firm. So firms make up industries. Okay, interestingly, Lee Iacocca, who once ran GM and later Chrysler, once said, if you have absolutely unrestrained competition in the marketplace, pretty soon you'll end up with no competition at all. So that's oligopolies for you. Another characteristic of the U.S. economy, increasing service sector jobs. There are basically three kinds of these. Services for the affluent, like banking, real estate, and law. Welfare services like healthcare, education, and government. And services provided by the underpaid, building services, custodial services, retail, food service. So here's the big catch in the U.S. economy, a transition from manufacturing jobs to service jobs. Low-skilled workers who would have been in manufacturing are now in these low-skilled service positions. The big difference, earnings are about 1/2 of manufacturing jobs, and benefits are only about 2/5 of the value of those provided by manufacturing jobs. Okay, the next characteristic of the U.S. economy, unemployment. Most economists consider healthy unemployment to be 3 to 4% annually, and that's made up of what they call transitional and chronic unemployment. Transitional is basically just people who are between jobs. Chronic unemployment is people who are generally unemployable. For example, those with severe physical limitations, those with severe mental illness, the homeless. The national unemployment rate about 4 years ago reached a high of around 9 to 10%. Right now we stand at about 7.5%. There's also underemployment. People are being forced to take jobs for which they are overqualified. Why? Why so much education but not the jobs to fill the bill? Later in the course we'll talk about status competition and this increased educational levels, even if not necessary. Approximately 1/4 of undergrads go on to graduate or professional training, and this number is increasing. The least skilled individuals in the economy will find themselves the big losers in the job competition. So those are just a few characteristics of the U.S. economy, just a few. Be sure to read Chapter 10 in Macionis to get the full picture. Now, how is the U.S. faring in the global economy? This can be characterized by increased multinationalization of corporations and production because of inexpensive raw materials, inexpensive labor costs overseas, virtually unregulated industries overseas, U.S. investment in foreign companies, regulatory legislation that increases production costs, but many say these are necessary to protect consumers, the environment, etc. Our government didn't regulate the flow of foreign goods while other countries' governments did. And lastly, U.S. workers' demands for increased wages relative to other countries. But those are necessary to live in our increasingly expensive economy. This has led to a big trade deficit. Currently, we're buying $235 billion in international goods while we're selling only about $190 billion. Now that's a lot of red ink on the balance sheet. Okay, so that's it for me for this week. Most of these video casts will be a bit shorter because we will rarely cover 2 chapters in a week. Remember, in order to pass the quizzes and participate in the discussions, you need to read the textbook. So head on over to Macionis chapters 1 and 10, and then I will see you online.